See, this is why I didn't want to buy a microwave.
Oh, hello, future foreigners. It's us here at Whoop Woo Studios in wonderful Cyberpunk Chongqing. And today, I'm going to be talking with ~the the navigator or the architect. What in your parlance would you decide as the creator of this universe?
I don't know if I'm the creator so much as the interpreter. The ideas come to me and I give them to you.
Ooh. Let's start off with Cyberpunk. What does Cyberpunk mean to you? We're here in Chongqing, named the Cyberpunk City of the World.
By Cyberpunk magazine.
What does it mean to you to live in the Cyberpunk City?
Thank you for asking that question. I'm going to answer a different one.
Oh, good.
Cyberpunk as a genre is something I've always really enjoyed in my life. I read Neuromancer, Snow Crash, all of those early cyberpunk books. So I have credentials. And I guess what I like about them is there's the mix between technology and oppression and living conditions and trying to live a good life. But I think what amuses me about it is like the failure of promise. I mean, because I think failure is funny, so that's where I like to explore. And so to me, these dystopian societies depicted in these books that I read in my formative years are very much about technology's promise to save us, but then it only makes life worse for the have-nots in general.
So do you find oppression to be a humorous subject that you enjoy tackling in a satirical sense, or?
It's less noble than that, I guess. It's because I'm not for oppression, but I think like it's not so much about like the dynamic between the oppressed and the oppressors, but how people without advantages, without privilege, without power, keep on keeping on. Because I mean, often it's very inventive and funny.
Cool.
Thanks.
Within those themes, what drives you to write about them? What drives you to live in a system where you've got the high technology and the low living together as one force as we careen into the future?
I don't feel like I chose to live a place for aesthetic purposes, although we did move to Chongqing for, it's pretty, there's art here, there's kind of more interesting people and things going on. So for culture reasons, I guess, but not purely aesthetic. I kind of disagree that Chongqing is the cyberpunk city, but I think I've just been like overruled by popular opinion. It's just a lot of cliffs with lights in buildings because we live in a modern world.
Would you say most modern cities look cyberpunk to you?
Maybe.
If you were a drone floating through the sky?
And I am. But I guess one of the characteristics of being in cyberpunk is like you wouldn't name your own existence a thing. Like similarly to how musicians and artists and writers and filmmakers themselves all resist genre labels. Genre labels exist for marketing purposes, which is important because as a consumer of artistic work, that is often how I make my decisions.
So a knight wouldn't be walking around saying how much they love living in medieval times.
Yeah, they're like, what a chivalric life I'm living.
If you work in a medieval times restaurant, you refer to yourself as
I mean, I guess that's the commodification of the aesthetic. It's being packaged and sold. So if you work at medieval times, actually I could see a cyberpunk scenario where you work at a present times. But you're set in the future, so you're like emulating early 2000s life. So you go to work and you put on your cell phone holder and like you serve, I don't know, avocado toast.
If you were to open up a restaurant themed in Chongqing right now, would
90s.
You say 90s? Or you wouldn't go with cyberpunk as what the...
Well, if the argument is Chongqing is the cyberpunk city, you have to have a contrast or like no one comes to normal the business, or maybe everybody goes to normal the business, and that's why I'm
normal.
not a successful business person.
Yeah,
Well,
you're always bucking the trend. So
Yeah.
if the city is, we are cyberpunk, you're
Yeah.
saying it's not.
I'm
For
contrary.
you,
Yes,
well,
I'm contrary.
and that's why we're not a success.
Yeah.
What about the apocalypse do you really enjoy?
My friend did an interview with John Hodgman many years ago in which John Hodgman wrote some kind of book about survival, and it was just about the time where The Walking Dead and all these kind of zombie shows came out. And so my friend
Very popular.
was into that and like wanted to like bond with John Hodgman by somehow, I guess it was related to the book, but like, so what do you think of this new trend of all these zombie shows? Clearly expecting the answer of like, I love zombies, it's so cool, genre fiction, blah, blah, blah. And John Hodgman was adamant that apocalypse fiction is the realm of the immature because it just like, you can't imagine change, so you just want to tear it all down. And maybe he's kind of right, because what's appealing to me about post-apocalypse is just like, all the structures are gone and we start fresh. We start anew. Because something that I do find interesting, The Walking Dead actually addressed this, is in a lot of fiction set in a post-apocalyptic world, a lot of it is either recreating previous social norms or consciously not recreating those social norms and structures, which I exist in this life just constantly questioning, like, why? Because I'm 2 years old.
And so is it the excitement of tearing something down, or is it the excitement of building something up, or is it the combination of the two?
I would say it's probably the latter more than the former. And more, I enjoy, I mean, I like The Walking Dead. We watched it until
Like most people. season
it went
six or
off the
something.
rails, and yeah, you just insert your own season for when that happened for you. But what actually I like is when it turns the apocalypse into an archetype, so that you can be like more clearly satirical about a certain aspect of life without having to like have a 500-page Bible for the world that you made. Like, I mean, I like hard fantasy that has, you know, like, well, I don't like, that's the part I didn't like about
There's that contrarian coming back.
like Game of Thrones, which is separate discussion, but similar idea of like world building. I don't care how the banks work. I don't need you to go into detail about that. So like,
Downfall of Star Wars.
yeah, someone like George Saunders,
The chicken guy?
yeah.
Colonel Saunders?
Colonel Saunders, who kind of like abstracts out a piece of society to then satirize it without having to like build everything anew. Like, enough is there that it's, you recognize the situation that he's satirizing, but it doesn't, you don't have the knock-on ripple effects of like having to set this in our actual real world. So I do like fiction that kind of generalizes to make a broader point, I guess. Does that answer any question
No,
that you
not
asked?
at all. I don't. Do you like cartoons? How cartoony do you like your apocalypse?
I mean, I guess that's it. I like the cartoon because I like dense, heavy, smart stuff, but sometimes I just like a, hey, smack in the face, idiots, look at what you're doing.
The dystopia itself opens itself up for the pathos, but also for the humor. And so,
Yeah, 'cause
how does,
there's-
when you're defining between the two, where does that flow into your storyline, your narrative, what you like to write about, what you like to live, the dystopia you are in now, that we all find ourselves in? Take your time.
Okay. I guess because we're kind of conflating two things in like cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic fiction. And I guess you could argue one might lead to another, because cyber is Mad Max, cyberpunk.
Well, this
Aesthetically it is, but like the premise is, you know, there's no
If we-
machinery, or there's machinery, but there's no robotics, there's no, well,
That
I'm
is
going to
fair.
throw a wrench into all of this.
Okay, good.
By saying I think my interest in this has to do with independence and survival. None of this is a commentary on my okay, so refuting John Hodgman in an interview he did 20 years ago with my friend at a paper that no longer exists. The entertainment I like doesn't always reflect like the way I wish the world was. And
So hence entertainment.
yeah, and it's definitely not like my political beliefs, because I do think like societies are stronger when they take care of their weakest members. But my interest in these genres is kind of this renegade loner surviving in a world that's at best indifferent and at worst actively pursuing them. And when I was a young girl, I was really into frontier fiction, which I would posit.
Like the game with the front. What's the game?
Oh, Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
Because I think I like the idea of like self-sufficiency and surviving on like, because that's when I play video games like Oregon Trail is not the game.
Oregon Trails?
Oregon Trails, depending on how you play. I do like those like resource games where you have to like gather this to do this and do this and do this. I think what I like about them is they're like simplistic. There's one thing you got to get done, and it's to survive.
You're an RPG person.
I am an RPG person.
As am I. And a lot of my RPG, even if it's Grand Theft Auto, I like going around and buying outfits and collecting.
Oh, I don't like that part of the game. Give me the quests. I'll do the quests. This is a digital nothing. I'm not going to buy clothes for it.
You don't like, well, so a sword or a weapon or something is...
No, swords and weapons upgrades.
Because you can actually...
Because there's a purpose for it. But like...
You like destroying things.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think it's like to get psychological in the real world. I'm trying not to be a destructive person, and that's complicated and hard to do actually, because just by existing, I'm taking up resources. And I deserve that. I deserve to exist. But I do like acting out this destruction, or seeing destruction acted out, I guess.
So when you put yourself out into the world as a cyber person, into the internets, and you are telling stories, and we are living in a world where people have a hard time telling if you are giving your politics, if you're giving your lifestyle, if you're just telling a story. I know that that's a part of putting yourself out there. Are you an artist? Are you a vlogger? What are you doing with your story? Do I have to believe everything that you are doing?
Yeah.
Everything you're talking about is because you're sad, or because you're angry, or you're destroying something, or you're building something? How do you feel about putting your work into the world
Well, I think there's two things there. One is I make the work, and that it's I'm not in control of how you consume the work, and that's fine by me, because that's a lot of work. It's your responsibility to figure out how it speaks to you, I guess. Death of the author and all that. But the other thing, I think you're kind of touching on like the genre gatekeeping that I do think is harmful. I do think, because when we discussed is cyberpunk a theme we want to talk about, I was hesitant because well, what if we say we're cyberpunk and people say you're not cyberpunk? Because that's what the internet is for, I think, is to tell people how they don't measure up.
And it's funny as it is, part of the joke is we've moved to a city without the intent of, I want to move to cyberpunk city someday. Even as kids watching Blade Runner, we didn't actually think at some point when we were in our middle ages, we're going to move to a cyberpunk world.
Yeah.
And yet we moved to a city that then decided that as an advertising campaign is going to call it the cyberpunk city.
Yeah, and as much as I'm like, whatever, it's a fishing village on a series of cliffs. I can order a taxi on my phone and get in and out without paying, and like cyberpunk things are happening in my life.
we can have Dijon mustard delivered to our door.
Yeah, not by drone yet, but I bet soon.
Probably.
The first time our toilet flooded in our first apartment, and we had our boss call up a plumber, and he arrived on a little scooter, and you're like, this is Robert De Niro in Brazil.
Yeah, he had the goggles on and everything, and didn't say anything. Hut.
I realize we sometimes present things that seem like I'm telling you story time from my real life, and then it's not completely clear when I'm joking that people interpret everything I'm saying as if like I'm saying it directly to you, which I'm not. This is a performance, and some of that is like, okay, get better at performing. But I think there is always that confusion in a certain part of your audience of like, oh, you're talking about a sad thing, you must be sad. Like, I'm not sad, guys.
Well, there's in any kind
I'm angry.
in any kind of performance, if you are looking at like, you didn't have the access to call like Jello Biafra and be like, dude, just chill out. Why are you so angry?
You didn't have a direct pipeline to these people, and you didn't feel entitled to it. So that's another cyberpunk thing.
Yeah.
Actually, I read an interesting article a while ago from the point of view of a UX designer critiquing
UX is
user experience,
okay.
Usually on websites, but maybe for all, it applies.
She's the tech person.
Critiquing, what's his name? Tony Stark's Jarvis interface. His argument was you would never, it looks cool, but like it would not be functional or helpful the way that they set it up. I mean, there is the cycle of like picturing technology and entertainment influences how the next generation of engineers designs technology and back and forth, like famously cell phones from Star Trek.
Maybe there were some episodes where they had video phones, but like it's silly to think that like, they hadn't actually thought that far into like or texting or sending pictures like of smiley faces and Spock.
Soccer ball, thumbs up, question face.
Damn it, Jim, stop it.
Use words. Yeah, McCoy would be
he'd hate it.
Emojis are ruining language. But also, less famously, because less people actually read it, in David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, he has a whole system where he predicts that people using video phone to call each other, a technology would adapt alongside, which would be physical masks, because people got tired of like staring at each other's faces or like self-conscious about like, I didn't put on any makeup yet. And then you called so I'm just going to put this mask on. And then we'll look like I'm attentive. And then I do remember like critiques of the book that came out in the late 90s. At the time were like, well, he got so many things right except this. But now there are those digital filters you can put on your face. You even adjust your eye line. Like, so he wasn't right about how it was enacted, but he knew that part of human psychology would demand that adaptation, which is...
If only he could have lived to see it. So, do you have anything to add to the end before we close up and in broadcast for the evening?
Stay inside.
And?
Carry on.
And order pizza because
that sounds good.
We can get pizza delivered.
From a guy. I use my phone to order up a pizza from a guy in a little bike.
That's the future. We'll see you then.
I like it.
I'm Western Toilet. Talking to me?